Lance Luce with some love songs, and then Sunny Side of the Street. I thought you were going to play that when I walked in the theater today. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to the Penny Stamps Distinguished Speaker Series. Today, we bring you someone from the digital frontier, exploring conditional systems as art, with generative software as his core medium, software artist Casey Reas. I want to thank our partners for their support of today's program, the School of Information, the Institute for the Humanities, the Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit, and Michigan Radio 91.7 FM. Tomorrow we continue our Penny Stamps on the Road offerings at MOCAD. We present Casey there tomorrow night, so tell anyone you know that has missed today, if they want to see it tomorrow, they can catch Casey tomorrow evening in Detroit at 7 p.m. at MOCAD, located at the corner of Woodward and Garfield. In Stamp School News, we're celebrating currently the culminating projects of this season's crop of MFA candidates with exhibitions of their work, with receptions this Friday in Ann Arbor and next Friday in venues in Detroit and Hamtramck. So tomorrow evening, you can start your weekend at 5 p.m. on North Campus, the Duderstadt Gallery featuring Cameron Van Dyke, the Slusser Gallery featuring Mary Ailing, Mike Bianco, and Math Monahan, and the Work Gallery on State Street featuring Laura Amtower. And then this Saturday, in case you missed it, for anyone who missed their prom, the Stamp School students have self-organized an inverted prom called MORP. Their prom committee is in the lobby today selling tickets for $7. This is happening this Saturday at 9 o'clock with amazing acts of student bands King Smig, Yada Yada, Ocean, and Tusks. This is at the Millennium Club. So your prom committee or MORP committee is going to be selling tickets after the lecture in the lobby. $7, don't miss it. Wear your best. There will be a regular Q&A today in the screening room, so afterwards you can join Casey and meet him and ask him your questions. And now for a proper introduction of our guest, please welcome Stamp School Professor Osman Khan.
So it's not so easy to frame Casey Reas's work. Is it the intrinsic complexity found in simple rules, or simplified outcomes of complex systems? Owing as much to the gestures of Pollock as to the rules of Solowitt. Equally referencing the theories of Malcolm McLuhan as to the experimental animations of Norman McLaren. Are we witness to video game glitching, or software's gone mad? Or is it just the layered abstraction inherent in modern telecommunication and networks? To go through Casey's list of achievements would, to be honest, take a long time. Casey Reas's work has been featured in over 100 solo and group exhibitions all across the world. Recent venues include the San Francisco Museum of Art, the Art Institute of Chicago. He has been collected by the Pompidou, the Victoria Albert Museum, as well as numerous other awards. Casey has titled his talk, "The thing that makes the thing is more interesting than the thing." But as so much, many of us are indebted to his making of processing. An open source programming language and environment, that thing that has provided so many of us the possibilities of making things. But I'm personally most indebted to when I first met Casey. This is about 16 years ago, while he was still a graduate student at the MIT Media Lab. And it was seeing those early software experiments of his, which at that time not only blew my mind, but really inspired me in my own work in the creative possibilities of coding and exploring alternate potentials of technology. Ultimately motivating me to go back to grad school at UCLA, where, as funny as life is, our paths would meet again. And today, for me and all of you, another opportunity for inspiration. Please join me in welcoming Casey Reas.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. I'm going to jump right in with something you already know. The title of this talk is "The Thing That Makes the Thing is Always More Interesting Than the Thing." It's a presentation by Casey Reas. And this is our table of contents. So I'm mostly going to be talking about work from the last 2 years. I have a lot of things that I am excited to show you this evening. I'm going to try and show you some things that I don't ordinarily show, process from the studio, and we're going to go in that order. So at the beginning, I'm going to show work that is very polished from the gallery, from the museum, and then I'm going to open it up on the last 2 pieces and show you a lot of process, a lot of half-finished thoughts, maybe a lot of thoughts that shouldn't even have been, but we're just going to open it up and look at it. So with that, we'll start with the foreword. It's a visual foreword, which I think speaks to what I'm interested in my work more than talking about things. I want to show you a few things. This is Saturn devouring his son. It's a painting by Francisco Goya from 1823. This is a still from La Jetée, a film by Chris Marker, which itself is a film made mostly of film stills. And this is an image from a computer program from the Commodore 64. And it's an anonymous program that showed up in the 1982 Commodore 64 User's Guide. So to make that more explicit, I see in my work a history in image, in painting and drawing. I see a strong history in cinema, which for me is structuring time, and then also in systems, and for me, more importantly, not exclusively digital systems, of which this is an example, but in conditional systems. So the introduction is an informal diary of my studio, and I decided to cut this off at 1 year, and so we're going to look at a series of images that are published on the Instagram account for the studio. Each image is on screen for 2 seconds, and we'll go through the year that way. I wanted to show you both how in the course of a year I'm working on new things. Some things are really rough sketches, maybe a collage made by folding a newspaper in about 20 seconds and snapped. Some of these images represent a whole day of work. But at the same time, I'm working on new projects, new ideas. Old things are always coming back through. I'm like moving through the flat files in the archive. Maybe I'm doing final documentation on a work before it goes into an institution. And this is a really informal journal. Most of it's photographs taken with my phone of the screen itself. That's why you see all those mores. Sometimes I find very old things. I spent a lot of last year writing a 700-page textbook on the processing programming language called the Processing a Programming Handbook for Artists and Designers. So that's why the textbook comes up in the images every once in a while. So we're moving back and forth a little bit between testing things in the studio and traveling to install things. Now we're in probably December. We are in December of 2014, moving more towards the present. The book was finally released. So what my year was like visually. And from here, we're going to start looking at work. And I worked for about 15 years without any sound in the work at all. It was entirely silent, entirely sort of without that other component. And it's been a long time coming, but within the last few months, I've just become extremely interested in having sound with the work. And so tonight, as an experiment, we're going to listen to a continuous soundtrack while we're looking at work, and then we're going to have some other music to other pieces of software. So the main soundtrack for the evening is Steve Reich, 1971 piece drumming. So I'm going to get that started while we're looking at the work. We'll let it get started before we continue. Another thing to say about the 4 projects we're looking at tonight are that they all relate to mass media. And they're all, in a way, taking this media and transforming it, augmenting certain parts and obscuring other pieces, sometimes revealing the infrastructure behind it. And through the work, we're going to be looking at work built around television, film, and newspapers. So this first piece, Ultra Concentrated, is all built around capturing television signals that are moving through the air. This is this piece installed. So this work is finished, so I'm going to read it as sort of you would encounter it if it were in a text. This piece is called Ultra Concentrated from 2003. It's a diptych of custom software, 2 computers, each 1920 by 1080 pixels. And the gallery projections are 56 inches by 100 inches. And this is an image from the Bitforms gallery in New York. This is what the piece looks like installed. The motion is very essential. I think for me what's more interesting than looking at images of the installation, in a way a simulation, is to actually experience the work directly. And so I want to show you this software piece. And so this will run, turn that down. This will run for a few minutes, and it's the software running live at this moment. And it's put along with someone else's music, with Ryoji Ikeda's music from Super Codex. I know he was here recently. He also came by UCLA, sort of on the way through the country. And what I've done as a way of starting to work with sound is to find existing music and to pair it with the work that I have as a way of figuring out, for me, what's working. And so tonight we're going to have that experience of watching the software directly and listening to the sound simultaneously. So here it goes. So that was looking at that work for a few minutes and sort of arbitrarily cutting it off at a given point. One of the major experiences of that work is that it has a beginning, but it doesn't have an end. And so the idea is when it's presented, it's running continuously. And people can spend as much or little time with it as they want. It's a really different situation here, where I'm more controlling the time experience. So for me, the software has always been the core of the work. And then other kinds of media have been generated using that as a base or a foundation. So here within the bitforms gallery, kind of turn the corner, you can see this object that I produced in collaboration with the architecture studio Aranda Lash. And then we move around and we see these images. So this piece is called Control Room Forward Command Post, and it's from 2013. It's a print matrix with 5 unique C prints, and each is 10.8 inches by 19.2 inches. So on the adjacent wall there, we see 2 other pieces. And this one in particular is called Substrate, Everything, Every Detail, from 2013. It's laser etched anodized aluminum, and it has a diameter of 24 inches. There's one detail. And another. So a show that came after that, here we're at the Pasadena City College, and this is a related piece called Talk Screen, which is also a diptych, but presented in a different format given the architecture of that specific room. And on the adjacent wall, we have this other piece called Control Room, You Haven't Won, from 2013, and it's a print matrix of 20 unique C prints. And here's some details of that. And then a set of larger prints derived from the same, again, set of software. This one's called Level 2 Biohazard from 2013. It's a C print, and it's 27 inches by 48 inches. Taken by Injection, 2013, same medium and dimensions. Magic Nude, 2013. And One Non-Narcotic Pill a Day, 2013. So of the core software, I mean, for this body of work, which I produced over a few years, I made about 8 different variations on the software. And this is another one. This one's hard to pronounce. It's pronounced like that, PFFT exclamation mark. So I want to show you this one also as a piece of software. So we'll bring down the lights again and let this one run. This one also is to another piece of Ryoji Ikeda. Okay, so that's imperfect because it's taking two existing things and putting them together. The goal for this work and what I'm approximating tonight and excited to share with you is this idea of building custom sound for the piece where the image and sound are tightly coupled. And so that's the goal, and that's where this work is headed. I feel like I need to get the Steve Reich back on, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to pick that up where we left off. So the next piece is entitled Casey Reas Loves Los Angeles. And that is a true statement, but it's also not a true statement. But the reason the piece is named that is after a wonderful film made by Rainer Bantham. Rainer Bantham is an architectural critic who came to Los Angeles and I think really changed the way people wrote about that city and that landscape. And in 1972, he made a film called Rainer Bantham Loves Los Angeles. And that was sort of the departure point for this piece of work. Here's an image of the piece. And as it said on the slide before, it's a commission for the Textile Room, which is a piece by Patterns, which is a local architecture studio in Los Angeles. And so the commission was to transform this piece through projections. And here you can see how it changes a little bit over time. You can see the effect the projections are having. So it's lit from the inside, and the light moves through the material to the outside. Here you see from the inside, you can see this one panel where there are not projections, so you can see how the materials transform through the light. And this is what this is in the background of what's in the background of this piece. It was a part of an exhibition about architecture in Los Angeles in the second half of the 20th century. And there were 3 new pieces commissioned, and this was one of those new commission pieces. And so while the rest of the show is about the architecture of the city of Los Angeles, my work for this piece is really about the city as seen through another major component of the city, which is the Hollywood film system. And so we're experiencing the city in a way as accidental documentary footage of the city as seen through Hollywood films from the last few decades. And that's what we're watching right now, Slow Down. And so through the course of the piece, we move through these different rhythms. We start in the air, then we move to the ground, we move up into the air. We start in the daytime, we move into dusk, and then we move into the night. And so the images follow these rhythms, but then as you'll see in a moment, when they're projected back onto this architectural sculpture, the images are presented in a fragmented way, which to many people's experience is sort of what the experience of being in Los Angeles is like. As you're largely oftentimes constrained to the freeways, you see these glimpses of what's really in the city. So here we're on the 110 driving through downtown. And then we're looking at the same streets from above. So these loops are compiled by going through a few dozen different films as a way of exploring the infrastructure and this other experience of the city. And so that then is projected onto the surface of this architectural sculpture, and this is the result of that. The other point of departure for this piece is a film made by Tom Anderson, which is called Los Angeles Plays Itself, which is an extended film essay about how the city is portrayed and misportrayed through film. So taking the Rainer Bantham film and that film together really, I think, provided the infrastructure needed to think about this piece and what it could be. here's a little bit of background on the piece. This is the work of Georgina and Marcelo, the architects. This is the steel that is the framework for the piece. And this is what it looks like unfolded. There are these skins or sails of carbon fiber and aramid that are then stretched over the steel material. And these were our tests for the projections. Basically, how do we house these objects within the piece, and where do we need to position them in order to sort of reach and throw the images onto these panels. So the third piece is where we break into a little bit more process. This piece, entitled A Mathematical Theory of Communication, is a commission for the University of Texas at Austin. And this is a Clark-Pelly building, and it is the computer science building on campus. And so the commission was to create a work for this building. This is the interior, kind of major atrium lobby area. This is what that looks like from the other side. And the UT Austin has a really wonderful art program called Landmarks, where they have different works placed around the campus. And so in this building, there were already 2 pieces by Saul LeWitt. We have this mural and this sculpture out front. And so these are the spaces that I was commissioned to work with on the interior of the building. And so this project began with meeting the faculty in the computer science department, visiting the site, taking a lot of documentation and measurements. And this is where it began visually. Saul LeWitt's been a major influence on my work over the years, and so having pieces adjacent to him, I needed to sort through that and to figure out what that meant. And I originally started the project like this, with I think an approach that maybe was too similar to some of the ideas that come through his work. And I took images of the building literally, and sort of pulled them apart to their component colors, and then reassembled them. So this is a larger view, another larger view, and this is a detail, and another detail. So after doing that, I started to take a different approach. And so here we're going back to some of the work from the ultra-concentrated show, and this became the source material. And the idea here was largely to think about where my interests intersect the research that's going on in the building. And that was largely with this idea of artificial vision, this idea of the invention of perspective, this idea of computer visions, how machines see, and pulling apart these images, which came from television, and pulling them apart in a way that references how they're constructed and how they're transmitted. So these were the first sketches. So at that point, I made another shift in the piece, and I moved away from that kind of source imagery, and I started using images, these images as the source. And these are made by compiling the full images together into these matrices. So with images like this as the source, the piece visually transformed like this. And the other addition here is it accounts for this idea of stereo vision. And so instead of just one of these pulling apart the images in perspective, there's 2 of them from 2 different points of view at the same time. So this piece is different from works I've shown so far because it really had a data orientation. And I thought of it in a way as synthetic photography. Sort of like I was entering an environment and I was trying to capture what I found there. And this environment was pulling apart the data from those images we were looking at. So what I want to show you now is how those images were constructed. And so what we're going to do is construct a series of them. And they'll be created and then they'll be destroyed over and over again. And so this piece was largely about tuning this system and then finding what I could within it. So this is another piece that is sort of collaged or applied with sound. And this piece is called Concret PH by Xenakis. So this is the final piece, and it's about the size of this projection right now. I'm sad to say, it's really not a good way to experience the work. This work is largely about standing in front of it and feeling sort of a sense of being visually overloaded and overwhelmed at all the different sort of micro compositions and detail within the piece. This is what the piece looks like as an image and not as a photograph, but I wanted to show you some details. So this is one detail standing about 6 feet away. And that's another. And this is what it looks like when you get even closer, a few feet away. And then this is the other wall. So there were 2 walls that were on opposite sides of that large atrium space that we saw that image of. These are some details of that. And then details again closer. And then these are what the 2 pieces look like together, which you actually don't experience in the space because they're so separated. But you can see how they relate to one another. So the last piece to show is called One Point Perspective, and this is the loosest, messiest project that I'll show. And it represents about 6 months of thinking and making, and there's a lot of process in here. The origin of the piece is this artifact, which was once such an important part of our culture, which has been changing a lot, since the web. But the newspaper. And I lived without newspapers from around 1996 until last year. And as a sort of an experiment, I started getting the newspaper again. And I found it to be really remarkable after this absence. And one thing I found interesting about the newspaper was how in the web we have such access to newspapers around the world, so we can get different points of view on different stories. And so, for example, this research started around the time of what happened in Ferguson over the summer. And so you can see in the Los Angeles Times, there's a very small mention there, Obama holds back on Brown. And then in Indianapolis, which of course is much closer, they ask a question, could we be a Ferguson? And then in St. Louis, you sort of have a report of what's happening there at the moment. And this shifting is something we all know, it's something we've lived with for a long time, since we had this very easy access to different newspapers. But what I found interesting then was taking the point of view of a single newspaper and exploring that over a period of time. And so this project started off with just some visual exploration and this idea of how data is transmitted. So it was this really simple idea of scanning the visual information and this other idea of sort of scattering it or shredding it. And that was the very first thing. You know, it was a few hours of starting to think about this. My own process is oftentimes thinking through making something, and I like to think about experience them rather than cutting myself off of ideas prematurely. And this is what that looks like in time when we're actually scanning over that front page of the paper. So the next test here was to slow it down and to see what happens when the edges were blending together. And this is looking at it from yet another point of view. It's converting it all to gray and then inverting it. So the text and the color of the paper are inverted. I think this was largely just exploring what happens when we take something that is two-dimensional and static and convert it into time, and in a way recreate some form of reading process or transmission process. And then the last set of this block of experiments, representing an afternoon maybe, was to get rid of the text and just look at an image in isolation. So in hindsight, this is all abstracting the content way too much. It's sort of taking out what's interesting. But at the time when I was doing this seemed like the path, seemed like the direction. So another idea that I was kicking around at the same time was this idea of simulcasting and compression. So, for example, taking a video. This, for example, is a video, a newsreel of John Glenn's Flight Thrills World. And we're sort of looking at different frames of the video in sequence, and then taking those sequences from where they appear in the video, and then presenting them into one frame. And this is, for example, interlacing two images together. So it's a newsreel about John Glenn with a newsreel of the Telstar satellite. And the content here is scratch content. It's just trying to think through or work through an idea. This is what that looks like with more resolution. And then here, kind of iterating through all the possibilities, you see these two different newsreels, and we're interlacing the images from different points in time in both of those newsreels. And this is an example of what that looks like in time, where we're taking the different points of the Glenn newsreel and different points of the Telstar newsreel and putting those together. So trying different sample content. Here we're looking at the Reagan-Carter debate in 1980, or one of those debates from 1980. And seeing what happens when there's more overlapping between the images through this angle. And another test. This was the Reagan-Carter debates superimposed with Romney-Obama debate. And then this is the same content, but looking at it in a different way, making the way that these things are interleaved more regular. One of the core ideas is taking something that's highly subjective but presented as factual or presented as objective and trying to make a bridge between those two. So after working on that for a while, I went back to the newspapers, and instead of looking at the full page in the presentation, I started looking only at the images. And so this is 1 week of images from the New York Times, the so-called paper of record. And what you see is sort of a moving back and forth between domestic issues, international issues, different kinds of stories. And over time, they form these different rhythms. And I looked at the image sort of as I had been before, by taking a piece of the image and stretching it out. But then I thought what was more interesting to move forward with was pulling that area apart a little bit so you can begin to get a window into the actual image. So you can see here the stretching at the bottom of that piece of the image at the top. So this is the kind of work that came out of that idea. And each of the columns here represents one day. It represents the image above the fold, which is, of course, the important or the primary image of the day. And looking at these days side by side and having them bleed into one another. And this is what it looks like at full scale. The aspect ratio is like this because it was for a commission for a 36-screen video wall that was in this aspect ratio. This is what it looks like moving in time. So you can see the images as they scroll through and scan and how they disappear into the adjacent cells. So this is looking in time. So the idea is that every day the images move one to the left when it's replaced with the next image, the image of the day. And then this is opening up that line a little bit further so you can actually start to see more of the content. And for me, this is when it started to after all that exploration, begin to work, but still is kind of in the middle point. When you can start to see fragments of symbols or fragments of landscape that trigger memory, for me, that's when this piece started to come together. And just to recall this idea, it went somewhere else for a while, which we'll look at now. But instead of using this sort of sample content, this became the primary content for the piece. So we spent an afternoon doing a shoot of different eyes. And the idea of this piece shifted. And it became more about the individuals and the collective. So here we have, it's actually cheating a little bit. It should be 4 individuals, but it's 3 individuals. And what happens when we interlace those together to create one body from the multiple bodies. And so it's the idea of something that's its unique identifier and splicing them together to create some other kind of body. This is what it looks like as video. But again here, rough sketches, rough thinking, trying things, and then sort of later reflecting on them. Here's another way of putting these pieces together. I think the thing I liked about the eye, sort of when I was working on this, was this idea that it's unique to the individual, it's searching, it's sort of looking, but at the same time it's also surveilling, scanning. And then these are going back and looking at other ways to approach how to combine these different elements together. So because all this work is coded and all the work is software, while I'm working, I save still images, which is a lot of what we've been looking at, and also periodically save out video as a way of archiving what's happening. And this is near where this particular exploration ended. So after that process work, I ended up making some decisions. And one of the decisions made was what kind of visual information I wanted to work with. And in the end, I chose the photojournalism. And so what I'm going to show you here is 6 months of New York Times imagery, where each day is 1 second. And so we started with that first picture on January 1st, 2014, and we're going to go through June 30th or 31st, I can't remember how many days that month has, and end there. And I want to be silent for this. So one of the ideas of working with these mass media images, I really feel they set up the psychic environment that we live within. And I think these images have really a powerful effect on our culture, our society. And I've been reading the newspaper, following the news really closely for decades, but I'd never had an experience when I first started looking at these images in isolation and looking at them in sequence over these sort of longer periods of time. I found that they really triggered memory, focused some opinions and feelings I had about the world. And once I made that decision to use that as the source material for the work started moving into this direction. And here, I think where you start to see some more recognizable fragments of the image, for me, that's when it was starting to be most effective. And so this is the current direction. These are images that I made about 2 weeks ago, and it's sort of the current status of the project, but it's still, I think, very much a work in progress. And I think those images that we just watched, they have a strong authority. They are very powerful. What I'm interested in doing is basically distorting them, looking at multiple images together at the same time, as a way of another way of viewing that, a more subjective and different interpretation of that content and of that view of looking at our world. So we're almost near the end, the bibliography, which actually is more of a suggested readings. But I organized it according to my own life and the ideas in this work at different time periods, different points in time. So when I was an undergraduate, which I expect a lot of you in the audience are, these are two books that I read in my early 20s that had a strong effect on me in the work I presented here today. Understanding Media by Marshall McLuhan. That book was written in 1964. The full title is The Extensions of Man. And then Susan Sontag's On Photography, published in 1977, which is a collection of essays written between 1973 and 1977. So the decade after that, for me personally, became a time of learning about these other forms of art and the history of that. And so the primary book for me from that period was this one by Lucy Lippard, 6 Years, The Dematerialization of the Art Object from 1966 to 1972. And the other book that's missing from this period is Umberto Eco's The Open Work, which was written in 1962 and then translated in 1989. And these are books that I'm currently working on. I've read pieces of them before, but it's what's currently on my mind. So here we have Willem Flusser's Into the Universe of Technical Images, which was written in 1985 but not translated into English until 2011, and In Your Computer, or How I Learned to Love the Art That Came Through Your Computer Screen and Why You Should Learn to Love It as Well. So this is a collection of essays by Dominica Quaranta. And with that, we're at the end. Thanks very much. And then I need to mention we're having the QA now in the screening room, so I hope some of you can join us for that. I'll see you there.